This podcast has been brought to you by Whataburger,
Kanye West,
Charmin Old Restaurant,
and Taco Bell.
Yo, skiddly diggly, this is Monica,
Sinai,
Christian, and Fernando.
And welcome to
the 915.
Today on the 915, we will be talking about Company E. So for our listeners out there who have never heard of it, what is Company E?
Company E was 101st Regiment of El Paso, comprised of all Mexican Americans.
Featured in today's podcast will be the soldiers' contribution to World War I, some of the soldiers who came back to tell their tales, ways that they've been honored in the city, and more.
Later in the show, we'll also be featuring our guest interview on David Gutierrez, the writer of the book, Patriots from the Barrio.
So everyone, how's your weekend?
Oh, it was pretty good, I worked the whole week. Nothing fun.
Well, at least you got money,
Yeah. What'd you do, Fernando?
I didn't do much, really. I just stayed at home the whole time. What about you, Monica?
The same as you, Fernando. How about you, Sinai?
Well, I went to go visit the Veterans Memorial at Thea Park.
No way.
Mm-hmm.
What's it honored? What does it honor?
They honor the veterans that fought bravely in the wars.
No way.
Oh, wow, from where?
From Company E.
Wow.
Whoa.
That's
I
so
love
interesting.
Company E.
There's also another memorial that we decided to visit too. There's one located in Chapin High School, which honors John L. Chapin, who was the captain of Company E.
Wait a minute. So the school was named after this guy?
Yeah.
That's pretty crazy, guys.
What'd you go with?
I went with my family. My brother was there.
I love your brother. He's so sweet.
What's the monument like?
Which one?
Both?
Well, the one in Thea Park, it was made by an artist, and it basically just looks like a list with all the names and members of the Company E. The one in Chapin, it's a statue commemorating John L. Chapin.
I love statues. They're really snazzy.
They are.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Well, it kind of upsets me that people don't really know about Company E,
Yeah.
Like, they did so much for us. Especially here in El Paso. Let me tell you guys. Buckle up, guys. You're not ready, okay? So these guys, this group of young men, were sent out to Italy, while the World War II was happening. And basically, they had to cross this river, which was called the Rapido River. So these guys, they go over there, right? And there's, bombs coming at them, and, all these bad things, just psh, psh, psh. And these guys are just trying to cross the river to attack these other guys.
That sounds terrible.
Yeah, a lot of them died while crossing the river. It was pretty crazy. They did so much. And, nobody knows about Company E. I didn't know about Company E.
Me neither. Not until this podcast.
Wow, me too. #relatable.
Who were the people in Company E like? Who were they?
Well, they were Mexicans.
Wow, the whole company was made up of Mexicans?
I mean, I don't know. Perhaps.
Yeah, I read that, it's made up, Company is just made up of
Pure Mexicans.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was reading about that too, along with this dude from Company E.
What's his name?
His name was Ramon G. Gutierrez. This guy.
That's your last name!
Right?
That's so cool.
It just really, came to me. I don't know. And his story is awesome, really, man.
Tell us your story, his story.
Okay, so basically, Ramon G. Gutierrez, this guy's pretty dang cool. He's pretty epic, okay? I'll tell you why in a bit. Ramon G. Gutierrez was actually a part of Company E. And during one of the battles, I don't quite remember if it was actually at Rapido River or not, but him and the company were being pinned down by a few machine gun nests. And he was getting, he's getting a little tired, a little sad to see all his, friends around him falling down.
Yes.
So he decides to charge up to one of the gun masts, right?
Whoa.
He's so brave.
Yeah,
I could
and
never. Oh my.
I heard. So he charged up to one of the gun nests, and while he's charging up there, he gets shot by a random bullet in the arm.
Ouch.
That makes him actually drop his weapon, but he still decides to go on. He gets close to the gun nest, tosses a grenade in, kills a few of the men inside, and jumps right in and finishes off the last man in hand-to-hand combat.
Nice.
That's
Right.
amazing. I
That's
don't know if I
pretty
could ever
cool.
pull off an act of bravery like that.
I could never.
I could.
Kidding. No, really. That's so impressive, actually, that, he actually was awarded this Russian medal. That's only been awarded to 2 different people outside of Russia. 3 different people outside of Russia.
Dang.
Yeah.
Go
Who were they?
Roberto.
one of them's a British Air Force general, and the other one was actually from America also. It was Eisenhower.
Eisenhower?
Yeah.
I think I've heard of him before.
His name rings a bell.
Yeah, it was Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Right, yeah.
Imagine, like, he's being put up there along with Dwight D. Eisenhower himself, the 34th president. Like, that itself is pretty awesome.
It's crazy how, like, not a lot of people talk about that.
Yeah.
Talk about his contribution to Company E, you know?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Wacky, if you ask me.
Really, indeed, yeah.
Well, talking about Ramon Gutierrez, his cousin, which is an author, his name is David Gutierrez. We contact him.
No
and,
way.
Yeah, we got
How
an
did
interview.
you contact him?
I just looked him up, and then his email was there. I texted him. Well, I emailed him. I told him if he wanted to be in the podcast. About that, I talked to him before. I recorded it. So here's like a little recording of the interview.
What inspired me to write the book? Genealogy research played a big role in this, in the fact that as I was doing genealogy research, I kept coming across newspaper articles of my cousin Ramon, who had served in World War II. And while also doing genealogy research, I connected with a cousin of mine who lived here in San Jose, California, that I had never met. And I finally met her through Ancestry.com. And after having dinner with her mother, who happened to be Ramon's sister, the idea came about to try to put this man's story together, even though I had never written a book.
Wow, that's amazing. Wait, so Ramon Gutierrez is your cousin?
Yeah, he happens to be a second cousin of mine. So the way we're related is my great-grandfather and Ramon's father were brothers. And they were, they were very young when the two brothers arrived from Mexico into the United States. My great-grandfather and Ramon's father were first generation born in Del Rio, Texas.
That's pretty cool. Is this the same Captain Ramon Gutierrez that received a medal as well from like the USSR?
He was a sergeant. He was not an officer. So yes, Ramon, while in Salerno, when Company E was landed at Salerno in September of 1943, they were one of the first units to hit the beaches in Italy.
Wow.
And Ramon and Company E, in part of an advanced squad, were pinned down because they came across German tanks. Mm-hmm. And here these guys were with just rifles trying to fight off German tanks and a machine gun that was firing from behind the tanks. Well, Ramon witnessed a couple of men from Company E from El Paso killed right in front of him. One of the first men to die was Manuel Gonzalez, who was actually like a Cub Scout leader from the El Paso area. He was one of the platoon sergeants, and he was shot and killed right in front of Ramon. And later on, Ramon would later say that I didn't care what happened to me because I thought I was going to die that day. So Ramon decided to charge the machine gun nest. And he charges the machine gun nest, gets hit in the arm while carrying the BAR, and he actually lost the BAR because he was shot. He continued to charge the machine gun nest and without a rifle, and he silenced the machine gun with a hand grenade, and then he jumped into the foxhole and killed the last German soldier in hand-to-hand combat.
Wow.
That sounds pretty cool. All right.
Wow, that's crazy.
So Ramon and Company E were fighting in Italy. This is how the Russians got involved. The Soviet Union was very eager to see what the United States and England was going to do on this new front that was opening up in Italy. They became the first American unit to oppose Hitler's forces on the European continent.
Wow.
The Russians had been fighting the Germans on the Eastern Front for a few years now. So as the Soviet Union was one of our allies, they were very interested to see what the English and the United States were going to be doing now on this new front. So they actually sent an officer as an observer at Salerno so that he could report back to the Russians what he was witnessing. And when he overheard what a Company E soldier had done in charging a machine gun nest and then killing a German in hand-to-hand combat, he felt that this is a story that would inspire his comrades back home. So he wrote up this whole story for the Soviet Union military, and the Soviet Union would later award my cousin Ramon the Order of Patriotic War Second Degree. And that medal was presented to the U.S. Secretary of State Cordell Hull by the Russian ambassador in Washington, D.C.
Wow. That's crazy.
So, knowing that story as a child, I've always felt that his story should be out there more, and I always wondered, why doesn't anybody ever talk about this man's story?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I decided to put his story together. And then through research, I realized that Ramon had served in Company E, a Texas National Guard unit out of El Paso, Texas. And then I find out that every enlisted man of Company E was a Mexican-American from the Barrios of El Paso. So now the story is a lot bigger. I just don't want to tell Ramon's story. I want to tell all of their stories. Mm-hmm. And through genealogy, because I'm heavily involved in genealogy research, I now used genealogy research as a foundation for my research and connected with over 60 different families of the men that served in Company E.
Wow.
It's really impressive.
The whole, yeah.
Another question that we have is, how do you believe that the Mexican Americans during World War II, what did they actually contribute to the war, made a lasting impression?
Well, I believe they contributed significantly. Company E stands out because they were the only segregated unit. They were the only entire unit made up of Mexican Americans. But Mexican Americans were serving in the Navy, all throughout the Army, all over. And Mexican Americans flocked to enlist and to do their part. They are the most highly decorated minority group during World War II. They were awarded more gold Medal of Honors than any other minority group.
Wow.
The problem is that we don't have our stories out there. That is the problem. And for whatever reason, we have fallen behind in that. And we have to get better at recording and documenting our own history. And this is just one example of that. Why did it take 70 years for someone to write a story of an all-Mexican American World War II unit? Mm-hmm. There are several books, several movies already of the Tuskegee Airmen, the Buffalo Soldiers. This was the all African units, African American units. There's books and movies about an all Japanese unit that served in Italy during World War II. Yet there's very little of our stories out there, and this was one of the big reasons why I wanted to write this story.
That's great. Yeah. Wow. Another question is, I was reading around, and during World War II, Mexican Americans also faced a lot of like discrimination even at home. And I was asking, like,
Right.
do you believe that like motivate them in any way to like help more abroad, or like could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, Mexican Americans were facing a lot of discrimination for various reasons. Let's take a look, and this is a subject that I touched on in the book. I touched a little bit about the discrimination because I wanted people to understand what these men were going through as they were growing up. Now, World War II veterans, they lived through the Great Depression. They were in elementary schools during this time, most of them.
Yeah.
During the Great Depression, if Americans understand the plight that America was in during the Great Depression, we talk a lot about the bread lines, and there was very little work, very little money. Now imagine what it was like in the barrios of Texas during that time, right?
Right.
It was even scarce, right? If mainstream America was having a problem, you could clearly understand what was happening in the barrios.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Then to top it off, during the Hoover administration, they decided that the Mexicans are the problem. The illegals that are coming into the country are taking all of the jobs, and Americans don't have enough jobs because of that. Sound familiar? I mean,
yes.
we're having the same issues today. We're talking about the same kind of issues today.
Mm-hmm.
So what they decided to do is do massive raids and start deporting anyone who was in the country that didn't have any type of documentation. And it didn't matter if they were Mexican Americans. There were people being deported back to Mexico who were born in the United States simply because they were of Mexican descent.
Wow.
And there's a lot of stories, and I do touch on one of them, where a gentleman named Ruben Aguilar, who was only 6 years old at the time in Chicago, Illinois. Now, Ruben's parents had been born in Mexico, but Ruben was born in Chicago. Yet he was deported right along with his family.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Ruben gets deported. This is in around 1933. World War II breaks out, and there was a letter that arrived in Chicago area for Ruben. And they said, wow, this is from the government. This looks important. They actually got it to Mexico where Ruben was still living because his family had gotten deported. When Ruben opens the letter, he's now 18 years old. It's a draft notice.
Mm-hmm.
For him to report because he needs to go to the military because he's being drafted. The same country that deported him now wants him to fight for.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So there's all kinds of incredible stories like that. But you have to understand the Mexican American plight of Texas. That goes all the way back to the Alamo. Texas has always seen Mexicans as part of the enemy because they were the enemy, according to Americans, during the time of the Alamo.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes all the way back then.
Yeah.
When my great grandparents arrived in 1901 in Del Rio, Texas, I talk a little bit about the segregation of Mexican Americans because, again, I wanted the readers to understand what these men were going through as they were growing up.
Right.
Wow. And do you believe that, like, because these people came from, like, Texas, like, they came from around El Paso, the Barrios, right? Did they face any more discrimination, even though They're all from border towns. People like.
No, I don't think there was any more discrimination. Now, just to put it into context of what was happening in 1939 in El Paso. Let's talk about El Paso. In 1939, there were 2 National Guard units in El Paso. One was Company H, 100% Anglo. Company E was the other unit, and they were 100% Mexican Americans. Now, why is that? Simply because they didn't want the Mexicans as part of Company H. They wanted to keep them separate. So that is the origin of Company E.
Wow.
It was the other unit that was segregated in El Paso.
Wow.
Now, a lot of these men were from Bowie High School. They were still in high school and still going to the National Guard, and they did it for the extra money.
Mhm.
And then December 7th, 1941 rolls around, and now America is thrusted into World War II. Now they find themselves all these men from the Barrios of El Paso find themselves in the middle of World War II. Now, even before that, in November of 1940, Company E had moved from El Paso and went to Brownwood, Texas, when the unit was federalized.
Mhm.
And when my cousin Ramon and other members of, other men from South Texas arrived at with the U.S. Army, the National Guard, with the Texas National Guard, they were put into Company E. My cousin, last name Gutierrez, spoke Spanish and English. They put him into Company E. Not only did the new people come in, were put into Company E, but the 36th Division at the time had all the Texas National Guards now at Brownwood, at Camp Bowie in Brownwood, Texas. What they did was they actually pulled out some of the Mexican Americans from the other units from like Dallas, Austin area, other South Texas areas. Mm-hmm. They pulled out a few Mexican Americans from those units and placed them into Company E. They maintained an entire 100% Mexican American unit all the way up until they started receiving casualties in World War II.
Wow.
So basically, they separate them because they were like Mexican Americans and stuff like that.
Right. They were segregated. Now the U.S. Army at the time stated that the reason that they were separated was because they wanted to learn more about the culture of the men in the El Paso area. That was the reasoning why they were separated. It's actually listed in one of your yearbooks.
Wow. So it's just like a kind of an excuse to like discriminate them.
Well, they were segregated. There was all kinds of discrimination before, during, after World War II, and just for one example that I talk about in the book, Gabriel Navarrete was from El Paso, Texas. Had been in the National Guard since 1939. Was such a good soldier that a lot of the officers said, Gabriel, you should go to officers candidate school because we think you should be an officer. So Gabriel went and took the test. It was a written test. He passed it. Mm-hmm. After the written test, you have to take an oral test. And after the oral test, he was told, Gabriel, we cannot let you go to officers candidate school because you have too much of an accent.
Wow.
Three times Gabriel Navarrete passed the written test, and 3 times after the oral test, he was told, sorry, we're not going to let you go to officers candidate school. It was not until after the battle at Salerno Gabriel was wounded. Gabriel was leading my cousin Ramon in the advance squad that finally pushed through the beachhead. He was wounded, sent back to North Africa. After he healed, he returned back to Company E. When he returned, he was given a battlefield commission and made an officer in the United States Army. But it was not until he proved his bravery on the battlefield that the U.S. Army made him an officer. Gabriel Navarrete would later be the commanding officer of Company E.
Wow.
I mean, I think that's amazing, like the fact that he had to basically prove himself just to become something higher.
Absolutely. Anybody else would have been made a second lieutenant right away. But because he was of Mexican-American descent, and the reasoning why they told him was because he had too much of an accent.
Is there anything else that you can tell us that you believe that we should know about this?
Well, I wrote the book because I wanted to make sure people understood the Mexican-American contributions to World War II.
Mm-hmm.
In 2007, there was a PBS documentary film made. It was a 7-part, 14 hours by Ken Burns.
Mm-hmm.
Not one mention of Mexican-American contributions to World War II. Now, if school teachers take Ken Burns' PBS The War that focused on World War II as part of their lessons, are students ever going to learn Mexican-American contributions? No. And that was a big piece of me writing this book. I self-published the book in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
I spent the next 3 years writing articles, trying to get their story out in front of people. And then I wrote an article that was published on War History Online.
Mm-hmm.
I reached out to them because I realized through Facebook they had 1 million followers. And I figured if I could get an article there published, and which they did, I was able to get 1 million eyeballs on something that I wrote. And that's why I reached out to them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, someone showed that article to Hollywood actor producer Wilmer Valderrama. Wilmer Valderrama's people reached out to me, and I met with Wilmer. And in September of 2017, Wilmer's production company obtained the film rights to my book.
Mm-hmm.
And Wilmer's looking to produce a TV series based on Patriots from the Barrio.
Wow.
That's amazing.
So after Hollywood's attention, we got Hollywood's attention. I signed a deal with West Home Publishing. And in May of last year, West Home Publishing released the new edition to Patriots from the Barrio.
Wow.
It's amazing, like, what you do, like, to show the stories of, like, Mexican Americans.
To make it more well known so that more people know that it's not just other people, it's also Mexicans making a contribution to the war.
Right, and that was the big key. See, I'm looking to take our stories. Now, we have our stories that we talk about within our own families. Mm-hmm. When the families get together, there's usually that one story that everybody talks about in the family.
Yes.
Whether you're at a backyard picnic, barbecue, quinceañera, those positive American contributions stories is what we need to get out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm currently working on a second book, again, World War II, of a Mexican-American pilot born in El Paso, Texas, raised in East LA, became the last American ace of World War II.
Is there a certain
and yet
time?
nobody ever hears about that.
Damn, that's honestly like amazing.
Well, I'm excited to hear about the second book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's it for the interview.
Yeah, we really covered a lot. We'd like to thank you for taking your time out of your day for us to talk about your book.
Absolutely, I'm impressed that high school students are doing this. So thank you for doing that. Now, is this a project just within your school?
Yes, but then our teacher said that like other schools are gonna hear our podcast and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Again, thank you for doing this. You're taking your time to make sure that this story gets out there, and I truly appreciate that. I just got back from Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
There was a high school teacher, a social studies teacher, who came across my book. And he said, Dave, I teach in a school where 85% of my students are Hispanic. And I needed something cultural relevant for them.
Yeah.
And he was able to obtain funds to purchase 40 copies of my book. And I flew out to meet with the students who have already read the book as part of their World War II lessons. Mm-hmm. They became the first students in the U.S. to use my book as part of their World War II lessons.
Wow. It's amazing.
This Saturday, I will be speaking at the California Council for Social Studies, where all of the social studies teachers in California get together in their conference. And we're hoping to spread this story even further.
We really hope that it does get out there, that more people get informed about this too.
Well, thank you, and good luck with your project, and definitely let me know when it's available for me to see.
Yes, sir. I'll email you when it's going to be published.
Excellent. You guys have a good day.
Thank you. You too.
You too.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.
I would like to thank Diego Gutierrez for the interview and check out his book, Pages from the Barrio.
Really, it's pretty cool, man. Thanks for helping us out.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's all the time that we have for today.
We'd also like to say thank you to our production team and our sponsors, Whataburger, Kanye West, Charming Ultra Strong, and Taco Bell once again. Remember to tune in for our next show, Tuesday at 6 a.m., where we'll be talking about another piece of lesser-known parts of history, with another interview you won't want to miss.